Ezra Klein, infamous at the New York Times. One of these charts, he said, actually made him do this podcast to begin with. And we're going to go over what that is and talk about some of the implications here. So here's the clip that I was talking about, found over the weekend.
White men who were 75 years old supported Kamala Harris at a significantly higher rate than white men who are 20 years old.
That's exactly right.
That's a real shift.
It is a real shift. This is the thing I am the most shocked by, I think, in the last 4 years, is that young people have gone from being the most progressive generation since the baby boomers, and maybe in some ways more so, to becoming potentially the most conservative, generation that we've experienced, maybe in 50 to 60 years. And so, the next chart, just to describe
This chart in some ways convinced me to do this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
This chart shocks me.
I agree. This is, to me, the scariest chart in this entire presentation. And again, something I'm very surprised by. On the bottom, we have age. And at the top, we have the gender gap in support between women and men. And, for support for Kamala Harris. And so what you can see is that, for voters over 30, the gender gap was fairly stable at around 10%, which is roughly where it's been in American politics.
And voters over 75, it's even lower.
That's right.
It's a fairly low gender gap among older voters.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, underestimate how recent the gender gap is. Historically, Republicans did better with women than men. And, this was true across most of the West, that center-left parties did better with men than women. And, that's changed in the United States in the Clinton era. But, it's been stable since then. But what's crazy is if you look at people who are under the age of 30, the gender gap has exploded. If you look at 18-year-olds, 18-year-old men were 23 percentage points more likely to support, Donald Trump than 18-year-old women, which is just completely unprecedented in American politics.
Is that abortion?
I think it's too early to say exactly what the cause is. What's interesting is that this is happening in other countries as well. Obviously, different countries have different political systems, but I've seen similar patterns in Canada, in the UK, in Norway. There's a lot of research, to do here, but it's still very striking.
Okay, but they didn't answer. I mean, it immediately goes to the question of whether it's abortion. But if you look at the data, is it really that women in their early 20s are voting much more strongly for Kamala than women over the age of 30? Or is it that the difference was in how the men voted? If you have a gap, why is the gap? Is it because, men are supporting Trump that much more? And that's actually what it was. It was young men in their, early 20s who were majorly going for Trump in larger numbers than men over, at other ages, much more than millennials, much more, so that's the big, so it for young men in their early 20s, it's not going to be, as much as I would love it to be the case, it's not going to be abortion. They automatically assumed it was higher support amongst women, when in fact it was for Kamala, when in fact it was higher support amongst those young men for Trump.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to be specific here, especially for our audio listeners who couldn't see these graphs. And if you want to hop over to the YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. You can join us live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. But that being said, I want to be really specific. He said 20-year-old white men voted for Donald Trump at a significantly higher rate than 75-year-old white men. I've seen some people interpret this. Right. Crazy, right? Okay. Really crazy. I've seen some people interpret this as young men are more conservative, potentially the most conservative generation ever. I think that might be true independent of this poll. To me, I heard they voted for Donald Trump. I don't think that necessarily means, they're going to employ some Catholic sexual ethics, or all of a sudden they're going to start, having the wife stay at home, live at home. And maybe some of that's true, but I just want to be very specific. It was voting for Donald Trump. And then the second one is this gender gap of support for Democratic candidates between men and women. So that'd be women supporting Democrats and then the men not supporting Democrats. It's very stable for most of it over the age 30. People in those relationships, they both vote the same way. And now we're seeing just a huge disparity between 18-year-olds when it comes to how men vote and women vote. So those were just to be specific for the audio listeners, what we were seeing. So, I mean, the obvious question now is, and I want to hear from you, Erica, maybe we can start with 20-year-old white men. Why? Why was there this historic change? Usually these people vote for liberals. Think Obama, it was kind of fashionable for young men to vote for Democrats.
Right. And I think we were hearing the shock there in Ezra Klein's voice, because we've been following this for the entire campaign. And then after the election, we've noticed this, that while the younger generation, if they were taken as a block, they went 53% for Kamala Harris. But when you broke it down by sex, yeah, the young men were trending towards Trump. So this like most progressive generation that they were supposed to be just isn't materializing for the guys. Now, I think it's interesting. I did a little digging into Ezra Klein's and Derek Thompson's new book this weekend called Abundance. And this is sort of their response, very rapidly put together, considering that we're looking at like a massive world historical shift here. But they put this together since the election as their answer for how to win really the young men back over. And they're calling it abundance. They're saying liberals need a new politics of abundance, where they're going to emphasize things like invention and creating and manufacturing and bringing that back to the United States. And I think that for the book, the interviews that I listened to, they seem to be floundering quite a bit, but I think they are pinpointing why the young men left. And it wasn't because suddenly all of the young men are discovering Christian sexual ethics. It's not necessarily a cultural shift, although I'll get to that in a second. But it does seem to be more in the they want more of the hillbilly elegy. They want that the manufacturing to come back, the invention, economics, etc. But I think there is a cultural element here of, look, like you can't tell men for 60 years that they're irrelevant, they're stupider than women, they have a supremacy complex, they've been running the world and they've screwed it up, and then expect them to stick with you. So I think there is a cultural element here that Ezra is missing in his whole, like, we just need abundance theory back.
I'd like to tee off on that, because it's one thing to have like TV shows and commercials where men are stupid and,
yeah, like doofus dad from the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can just roll your eyes at it, whatever. But then you get 2019, the beginning of like all this DEI stuff, and then you have COVID, and basically white guys are the problem with everything in the world. Like, again, like one of the arguments that Trump made in the first term was like, okay, so if you take down the statue of a slave owner, then are you going to take down statues of George Washington, or the Confederates? I mean, they're going to take it of every slave owner like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. No, we'll never do that. And then all of a sudden they take down the statue of, Teddy Roosevelt in New York City. Like, wait, what?
Was that? I think it was Thomas Jefferson, but yeah.
It's like, well, why Teddy Roosevelt? Like, it doesn't really make sense. Like,
it was Thomas Jefferson, but yeah.
No, there was a Teddy Roosevelt statue taken down in New York City.
Really?
Yeah. They took down the Jefferson one at City Hall or whatever, and then they took down Teddy Roosevelt at the museum or whatever.
You're right. Okay.
So again, it just gets to the question of like, like it's one thing for feminists to kind of roll their eyes and scold at men. Like, yeah, that's been, as Erica said, that's been happening for 60 years. But then they amped it up, and it was like, we have to like, make sure that, there's no white guys in commercials hardly anymore. Like, we have to replace them with everyone because the whole Black Lives Matter. So now it's like, and we can just roll our eyes at that a little bit. But then as they implement it into DEI policies, and it's like, oh, you're a white guy, try getting a job now. And also, oh, by the way, with all this inflation that we had because of COVID, try buying a house now if you're a young guy in your 20s. Forget it. Like, there's so many ways that we've put the squeeze on people. And so now Rahm Emanuel is like starting to panic. He wants to run for president, and so he's convened this emergency meeting of mayors and governors because they're also concerned. This Rahm Emanuel is like, he's seeing these same kind of numbers, and he's freaking out that conservatives are seeing a massive spike amongst the youth. And I just can't help but think about it. It's like, I can't believe locking up kids to keep teachers unions happy, blaming white guys for all the problems of the world, and suddenly you're having a problem with your electoral politics. I mean, the Democratic Party's message is that every white guy is a racist bigot, and Mexicans should stay in the fields and pick the
who's gonna
pick the fruit.
Yeah,
who's gonna clean my toilet, right? And I think I think we saw this over the weekend as well with more Democrat rallies, so the Bernie Sanders AOC rallies, where they're doubling down on that far leftist. They're like, the problem is with this election, the reason we lost is because we didn't go far enough left. We need to go even more extreme left. And then you have the Gavin Newsom contingent, which is in the Rahm Emanuel, like they're like, we got to moderate,
which is smart.
I
think that is actually
smart,
a lot more dangerous.
It's fake because they actually believe that men can turn into
women. They won't do it.
They won't.
Right, but say it's fake, say whatever. That's the smart play. I think
it's the politically expedient play.
Right. The observation that I would add here is one, like you got to think about an 18-year-old right now was born in 2008, which is crazy. Make us all feel old. But their entire promised coming of age events was basically robbed from them in a couple different ways. One being COVID being the big time. I mean, the entire world,
high school graduations, college graduate, all of the rituals
gone. That's all gone.
Confirmation for some kids.
And for them also, like a lot of the affirmative action racial policies affected their opportunities when it came to colleges that they could get into, jobs that they were applying for. Also, they came of age in the Me Too era. So specifically for young white men, that was like a really challenging time to navigate dating, any of that. I mean, so they've really come under a time where Democrats controlled power, and the events that were going on pushed by Democrats were all very anti-men would be probably the most charitable way to put it. And then you throw in the racial element that happens too. So I think there's definitely a degree of rage, I think, just that has been building up, and they have the people to point the finger at now.
So here's the interesting thing, because of everything you just listed, Pogo, they equally would have affected males and females. So the economic issue, like women are paying a lot for eggs, women can't buy houses either, et cetera, et cetera. But the one that you mentioned, the #MeToo, that's more of the cultural growing out of the sexual revolution whiplash thing. So I think there's a lot of rage on both sides. Like there's a lot of anger and discontent, both in the male and the female. They share the economic burdens, right? And the disappointments. But where the difference lies is that the young women seem to be reacting by going far left, and the young men are reacting by going far right. And that's a really bad place for a society to be, because regardless of IVF and surrogacy, we still need men and women to get together and mate and form stable marriages in order for society to go on. And so,
well, I don't disagree with you, but it's going to be the equivalent of like a famine, because you're going to have this generation of women in their 20s who've adopted the progressive left-wing ideology. They're the total girl bosses, and the discussion on this is really interesting online. And every day I think my lucky stars, I am happily married for near 20 years. And I'm not out in the work. I mean, guys in their 20s, dude. And here's the funny thing about it. The internet has made this worse, because I think there's so many goofy simps out there that are sending all sorts of fake praise towards women. They did a thing. They did a survey.
Like Harry Sisson.
They did it. Yeah. They did a thing on OkCupid where they surveyed, women, and they surveyed men, and they asked them to judge the people on this site, between very attractive, moderately attractive, average, not really that attractive, and not really attractive at all.
Downright ugly.
Right? Like the 5 things, right? And men, they interviewing all the women, looking them over, they basically said it was a bell curve. It was 7-10% were very hot, and 5 to 7% were very ugly. But with most of them are either a little bit more attractive or in the middle, or maybe not so much. It was pretty balanced bell curve. And you look at that, probably the way life really is. Then they asked the women.
Oh boy.
How many would you think of as very attractive? It was 0. And then kind of attractive was a small number. And then medium was also kind of small. Not so attractive was the biggest graph, and downright ugly was the second highest. And so their version of these girl bosses in the 20s, every every 5 thinks she's a 7 and should be able to land a 9, whereas guys maybe have a little bit more of like a perspective. I feel sorry for the men in the dating pool right here. So what's going to happen? These girl bosses are like, no, what's good enough for me? And you're going to be single and you're going to have your cats. And then the men are just going to be like, whatever. And then maybe a few years later, another crop of ladies will come along in their 20s and they'll be in their 30s and they'll be like, hey, I was part of a lost generation. These ladies are crazy, but I have a stable house. What's going on? And that's what it's going to be, the equivalent of like how things were like in the famine.
Well, it's perfect conditions for harems, right? Because you have multiple women who are all competing over the one guy. But then we
do have harems in our society. It's called OnlyFans.
Situationships, yeah. And I think too, it is a famine for, on the other hand, for young men who want to find a woman who shares his values. That is so much more difficult. Like a woman who would be willing to work part-time or not at all and take care of 3, 4, 5 kids. Like they have a vision of a more conservative, traditional family life. And with these polls, the real frightening thing about them to me is that it is so important when you marry to share fundamental values and the most important questions you answer together, because life's hard enough. If you don't agree on the most fundamental things, like the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune are going to knock you off your rocker. And so it is a very concerning trend. And I think it is the...
Can I ask on that poll then real quick? So we were saying there's a big disparity in how younger like men and women are voting currently. So would you say the general trend would be married couples for the most part after that, age 30? So I'm not sure exactly what generation that would be, but like 30-year-olds on typically agree with each other politically for the most part?
Yes, actually. And what they find is that marriage has a moderating effect on both men and women. And I don't mean like moderate, like, oh, now they're wimps. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it tends to be the case that when you're single, you have, strong opinions about the world or whatever. And then when you meet somebody else and you get married to them and you pledge your life for the rest of your life, then suddenly, some of these more sharper edges get kind of, and it's not just the men, it's women too. The kind of like, people both kind of calm down. And when men are around other men and they're all single, like, oh, this is the way it is. And they all think they're right and smart and wise. And then they realize that there's a whole lot more to life that they really didn't understand when they're married to a woman and they see that from the same perspective. The difference is that I'm willing to admit that's also the case for the lady folks. You get a bunch of 20-year-old women together and they think they've got everything else figured out. And then they get married and like, whoa,
I'd be curious to see how this corresponds with like marriage rates in general, I guess. Like, I wonder, I would assume down.
Yeah, marriage rates are definitely down. And that's the kind of what I was getting at, like that 25 to 35-year-old women right now, they're the girl boss generation, and they're less inclined to get married. Mm-hmm. And men, I think this is a trend I've been talking about for a while. I think, like when I talked about the Ohio State football team and all these guys who are not just the Harrison Buckers, but like lots more men who are being very vocal and active about and professing their love in Jesus Christ. And they're like, what is going on with this? I love it. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. But it's striking. And I kind of think it's because the people who are, 20 years old right now have lived their full life in a very digital way. And if you're a man and you're 20 years old, you have been exposed to nasty pornography, not just like a little Playboy that you found in your dad's closet or something like that. And it's all served up to satisfy your ego. Oh, you like this? Oh, you like that? Or you like this? And it pummels you. And so they have to do a clean purge. They have to strike at it and then realize this is trying to attack my soul. This is evil, and I hate this. And they're becoming, I think, men of virtue because they're having this thrown in their faces, and they're having to be. It's a much more difficult situation than I'm Gen X. I mean, it was not like this at all.
It wasn't available like just with a swipe, right?
At your fingertips, yeah.
Yeah, for the men who have overcome that, for the young men who are in their 20s and 30s now who have overcome the smartphone, the rise of the smartphone, and they're digital natives, but they're not porn addicts. Like they have fought a serious fight. in a way that, like you said, our grandfathers didn't have to, in terms of that vice. There were other vices back in the day. But
no, for sure. But what you're seeing is a support system on all of that. Like, here's how to battle porn. Here's how to do weightlifting.
So
find other ways to channel your energy. And so that's why are there so many guys online doing the whole gym bro stuff and lifting weights?
It's channeling the energy, right?
It's like, they're channeling their energy. So
all right, can the 20-something-year-old on the podcast, the 20-something-year-old on the podcast needs to speak at this point.
Oh, right.
If you guys remember, I am actually a part of this cohort. Mercer. I think all true. What I will say, and I think this corresponds with, there's a Pew Research poll recently. I think it said that for the first time, Christianity has stopped declining. It hasn't grown, but rates of Christianity in America have stabilized, which is the first step to growth. And I think this I think I was listening to, like, Michael Knowles was talking about this on a podcast, but there's a real desire for something to hold on to, I think, for my generation, because we've been raised on probably the quickest changing set of incentives or what should be important to you. Like, sometimes by the year it changes, to the point where you're not really sure what to hold on to. And the idea of, like, moral relativism, I think it's just in the air. Like, throughout my entire childhood, I think being exposed to just more information than ever online. I'm a digital native. You can go find anything you want, and someone's going to make an argument here. Someone else is going to make an argument here. And if you don't have really strong mentors or family members in your life that can provide you not only just, like, a mental framework, but they live that life as well, and you see satisfaction there. I think also my generation dealt with more divorce during the financial crisis than probably a lot of other generations. I know many friends personally who come from families of divorce. And so I think the appeal to Catholicism and Christianity, and marriage, actually, for that matter, is that you have something real and dogmatic in the positive sense. I think it's often used with negative connotations, but it's something to believe in, something to work towards. And I think maybe what Democrats are kind of missing here in this scramble to get the new Joe Rogan or whatever is the vision.
It's not going to be Ezra. I'm just going to throw that.
Yeah, right. Ezra can say abundance or whatever. I think he's close. But I think what it really appeals to people about Trump is unapologetic vision for America being good, being great. That is really appealing to men. I think you throw in all the extra discrimination stuff, but to be very transparent and put forth a vision for a country in which you can work a good job, you can afford a home, you're not going to be discriminated for based on your beliefs or based on just debates you're having online. There's no, like, school marm. You can just get removed from the internet cancel or whatever culture. If you do cancel culture. I think the left certainly has a problem with what would they call it? Like, I'm blanking on the words. It starts with a P. Pariahs, maybe, like people that break from the conventional logic of purity tests of what you have to believe. You have to believe that men can become women. If you do not, you're wholesale rejected from the party. You're no longer welcome back. That's why I think it's not as much Republicans here. I think Republicans allow, and that's why they gained a lot of people who, like I said, maybe aren't traditional Christian ethics, but just saw that they were hated by one side and wanted free shelter. I think that's one of the big innovations of Trump is it is a broad tent. It is a coalition for now. Who knows how long it'll last. But he was able to bring over a lot of the people that were just truly freaked out by, like, Kamala Harris paying for transgender surgery for illegal migrants. Like, that's an ad lib that is real. But the freaked out people see a safe refuge, and people that are frustrated with the authoritarian nature of the left, which ironically is projected on the right now, when it comes to medical science and consensus, and frustrated with things obviously not matching up with reality, have come over to the side too. So now it's a question of, can you keep it? But none of this surprises me as young white male 20s cohort, for sure.
I just want to tack on one little thing. I thought great insight, though, that you had, which is hard for me to say for you, but President Trump in 2016 was very much, this system is crap, blow it all up, what a lie, these guys are all fake. But he didn't have as much on his positive vision for the future. And I think that's the difference in 2024 when he ran for president. He did have more of an vision, like he and Elon Musk, and I want to go to Mars, and let's open up oral
Let's build here.
Let's build.
Well, and JD
again.
Vance, right?
Yeah.
JD Vance has given it a robust, actual Catholic vision.
Let's build here. We're going to bring inflation down. People are going to be able to afford things again. You're going to be proud of your country. Our military is going to be strong and lethal. You name it. I mean, there's 8 different things. We know what men and women are.
Yeah, and he had a positive vision, and that's why he not only got the Electoral College, he actually won the popular vote.
No, and I will say also what appeals to men is he lived that vision as well. I mean, I've never seen someone almost get shot in the ear, pop back up, and then a couple other assassination attempts. Say what you want about that's what I think people don't understand about men and Trump is men want to see action. All the words are fun. Kamala Harris and she was even bad at words, so I don't even know why they ran her. But Donald Trump, in terms of action, is really hard to dispute that he possesses some type of heroism or courage. And you can call that naive or whatever, but I think it's obvious. Anyone that just casually observed the election, it was true.